Okay, great. Actually, can I go back? Great. Okay, so like many academics, I have a lot to say and not enough time to say it in. So people tell me I talk fast. If you don't understand anything, we'll try to get to it in Q&A. So let's get started. Today I'm going to be talking about disinformation, right? So in my field, I'm still trying to get people to distinguish between dis and misinformation. So I'll try to articulate that difference as clearly as I can this morning. So I define disinformation, and that box should go all the way around the text. Disinformation as the surreptitious, purposeful distribution of messages intended to harm targets and or benefit sources. In many cases, including the one I'll discuss today, harm of the target is exactly the same as benefiting the source. And of course, the messages that are distributed are, although in many cases they are false, in many cases they are not necessarily false, right? And so to break down these different criteria, right, we've got a hidden source, as we do in the case of the IRA, which I'll discuss in a little bit. The source has to have knowledge of the message's purpose, right? So that's what differentiates disinformation from misinformation. When you know that what you're distributing has some nefarious purpose or is false, then it's disinformation. When you don't know, that is misinformation. There has to be an intention to harm targets. In other words, this just can't be, oh, well, I'm distributing something that's false that may or may not have a given effect. There's a very distinct intention that goes along with that. And of course, in many cases, there is also in most cases, there's an intention to benefit source. And in the case I'll discuss, of course, the harming target and benefiting the source is kind of the same thing. All right, so in the study of disinformation, there are sort of three major questions, and I believe that the scholarly study of this is at very early stages. And so we have three questions that we really need to know at the beginning of any analysis of disinformation. Firstly, who is being targeted? Secondly, what's being said, which gets at the essence of what digital disinformation actually is, or disinformation more generally. And then thirdly, in this case, which identities and tactics are the most successful? And the analysis I'll present will address the first two of those questions. I have a paper that's currently under review that will address all three, in case you're interested, so please watch for that. So how many people in here know who the IRA is? People know the IRA generally? Okay, great. People did a good job of explaining who the IRA is, so I can sort of breeze through this slide. So Twitter claims, I'm going to start right in the middle. Twitter claims that it's identified almost 4,000 IRA accounts as of January 18th of this year. It sent out a note at the very end of last year in which it contacted, end of last year, beginning of this year, where they contacted almost 700,000 users who interacted with IRA content. Now, an interaction as defined by Twitter includes engagements, quote unquote, that's clicking on something or replying to somebody, not views. And so the actual number of people who saw IRA content is likely much, much higher. And they flagged at least 175,000, almost 176,000 tweets that were posted, I believe, within the 6 weeks, previous to the election. The total number is much higher than that. But this is sort of a baseline amount of content that Twitter acknowledged at the end of last year / the beginning of this one. And so fast forward to February 14th rather, of this year, when NBC News of all sources released 200,000 Russian troll tweets, which I analyzed in this analysis. Just this past week, or last week rather, the news site 538 released almost 3 million such tweets, and so I got to analyze those. And so this was the analysis I had done before that, which I think will cover much of what is already known, and hopefully some new things as well. So I downloaded those and analyzed those, and that's what this analysis is based on. Here's some basic descriptive statistics of what's going on. There were almost 3,000 or so tweets that were identified by the U.S. House Intelligence Committee on November 1st of last year. The data set that I downloaded and constructed not only the NBC News tweets, but also some from the Internet Archive, included 439 tweets, which is about 16% of those. Let's see, there were just over 200,000 tweets in the NBC data set, almost a little over 7,000 in the Internet Archive data set, and pulling out all the Russian language ones, of which there were a few, there were just south of 200,000 of those tweets, which spanned between July 14th and July 2014 and September 2017. So let me get into, I'm just going to really quickly talk about the methods. I can get into this in greater detail during Q&A if anybody's really interested. I did some content analysis, a little bit of qualitative elaboration to figure out who they targeted, a little bit of computational descriptive, and some topic modeling to figure out what they said. And in terms of what worked, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't have time, I did some nested regression to figure that out. So this is a graph of IRA activity by month. This echoes what Renee said in the last session, that activity spiked during the 2016 election. You can see that it goes up right in the middle of 2016, but really sort of continues a pretty big spike after the election, and only really dies down, at least as far as the data that I looked at, toward the end of, or toward the middle and second half of 2017. So you do see this continuing sort of slope of activity after the 2016 election. So I find this particular graph interesting because it shows account creation dates over time. And what you'll notice, if you can see those dates at the bottom there, is that a lot of the accounts were created many years prior to the 2016 election, right? So, Vladimir Putin didn't like roll out of bed in the middle of 2016 and say, wow, we should really hijack the 2016 election. This is years in the making, right? So they've had these accounts that are sort of sitting out there just waiting to be activated when an apt purpose was found, which of course it was in the 2016 election. So these are some user categories that they targeted. If you've read the 538 article that came out last week where they sort of categorize and they look at some of the different categories, this is sort of similar, overlaps a little bit, but is also kind of different. The big red line is at the left is pro-Trump Republicans. There are also a number of anti-Trump liberals. That's the blue one to the right of that. There are a bunch that were trying to be local news outlets. That's the gray one. That's third from the left. A bunch that were trying to be black activists. And contrary to reports, there were a few pro-Trump folks on the left, a few anti-Trump Republicans. You get a little bit of fake news and folks pretending to be Arabic or from the of the Islamic faith or from the Middle East. But those were just a few individuals there. Yeah, and these are just some examples of some of the tweets that I managed to fish off of there. You've probably seen some of these. This is from a pro-Trump right user called Pamela Moore 13. If you look at some of those tweets, in many cases I think they're a little bit hard to distinguish from actual Trump voters. But you can judge for judge for yourself, right? Like this is, you don't have to take my word for it. It's right there on the screen for you. Here's one from the anti-Trump left, and you can see actually the one tweet that I have down there that's sort of anti-Trump is kind of like softballing, I think, but that's just my personal opinion. Then you've got this news outlet. It's kind of online Cleveland, kind of sounds like the sort of thing that you might think was sort of a credible news outlet if you weren't actually from there. And the news articles seem to be things that could be plausible, but again, I'm not really sure what they were going for here because this sort of mimics it in a way that's, I think, kind of faithful. And then, of course, these are the black activists. You can see that this one in particular is heavily anti-police. And so trying to get on the whole Black Lives Matter train, including the sort of, quote unquote, urban use of for FOR. But, so that's one that tried to do that. So these are the top hashtags. You can see top conservatives. Most of these, the red ones, are conservative leanings. You can see top conservatives on Twitter, MAGA, Patriot Journalist Network, Christian conservatives on Twitter. There's one that's sort of, left or right, which is hashtag Trump, which could be used by people who are in favor or people who are against. A few that are sort of maybe journalistic in nature, politics and news, but 7 out of 10 are right-leaning in terms of their prevalence. Here's some topic model categories in terms of what they actually talked about. Election 2016 was by far the top category. Conservative politics specifically, hashtag games, black activists. I do want to show you some examples of these. So this is one of the topics on the left is some of the terms that popped up in the election 2016 topic. Trump, politics, Clinton, Donald, etc. In conservative politics, you can see the right-leaning with those right-leaning hashtags, TCOT, PJNet, Christian conservatives on Twitter, Trump for president, Islam kills, wake up America, etc. So that's one of the major differences there. Here are some that are sort of between black activists, got out all the time. You see some that are sort of generally associated with that topic, and then some that are kind of hashtag games, which illustrates the fact that these folks are really trying to infiltrate things that aren't necessarily political all the time. They're trying to get on what is most popular, what are people going to be paying attention to, but they may not necessarily be political. Let's see, so here are some key findings. They targeted pro-Trump conservatives, anti-Trump liberals, black activists, local news consumers, not Hillary supporters, as we've also heard. What did they say? They were talking about election 2016, pro-Trump, pro-Bernie, anti-Hillary, black issues, pop culture in the Middle East. What worked, users that have been created more recently were more effective, covering black issues and conservative content. Here's some broader implications. They didn't cover all bases equally. They see blacks and conservatives as prime target. They aim not only to sow chaos, but also to push certain political agendas to the exclusion of others. And finally, much of the content is totally innocuous and even fun. Maybe they're just trying to gain America's trust for their ultimate nefarious purposes. And there it is. All right.